Hello, everybody. This is our last fruit for thought for the year. My name's Amy Smith, and I am the Chief Transformation Officer at Be Well Co. and Oranges Toolkit. And we have the awesome human Luke Martin with us today to talk about some of the challenges we have at this time of year. He is a clinical psychologist. He is also the clinical spokesperson for the wonderful Beyond Blue. We have collaborated in the past. And Luke agreed to do this, which is very kind. We wanted to kick off the topic of how to stay mentally strong during the holiday season, which for many of us is holidays. Particularly if you have got children who are in the house saying, Mum, I'm bored. Dad, can I have some money? Or just, can you please amuse me when you have to work? So there's a lot of challenges for everybody, I'm sure. But we're going to kick off with the first question, which is, why do we get ourselves so stressed at this time of year, Luke? Why?
G'day, Amy, and g'day, everyone. Thanks for the invite for this kind of as the year winds down conversation.
Oh my God.
I, I think, and I feel we feel it in the community, we feel it amongst our colleagues and friends. It is a time that is meant to be, very joyful, and it can be, but we do get stretched for lots of reasons. I think, in the workplace, we can create a lot of artificial deadlines around things have to be done by Christmas Eve. The greatest gift that, Beyond Blue gave me this year was we actually had a little conversation in November and said, let's make it to the end of the year in one piece. Let's actually have some petrol in the tank. And the
Yeah,
greatest gift, better than a box of chocolates, was let's do less. Let's do less over December. And that has
I
been
love that.
really helpful. I think the other thing is we have built up around the festive season a lot of expectations around it being this magical time, this perfect time.
Yeah.
We've been kind of absorbed the messages from the movies and the songs that it needs to be this very special time, which all it does is it puts a lot of pressure on us. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think also it's a time when we do a lot more in terms of we socialize more, we eat more, we drink more, we're running out of energy. We're not sleeping as often. So the basics of our self-care get dialed down a little bit. That can be tough.
Yeah.
And I think we also see a lot of, family relationships and some of the tensions that can come up when you spend more time with your family of origin or your current family, and the different expectations we hold around how Christmas should play out can be a source of tension. And I think there's also this reality of it's a really expensive time of year. You spend a lot of money
So
on
expensive.
gifts and feeding people and traveling, and we
Yeah.
know cost of living crisis for the last few years. There aren't many people that have spare cash, and then when the festive season comes around, you're reaching into your pocket every 5 minutes to pay for something. So we know that can impact people as well. So there's a real kind of layering of things that happen at this time of year that leave all of us feeling a bit
Yeah.
stressed and a bit worn
It's
out.
the imperfect storm, isn't it? It's sort of, you sort of know, and you feel this guilt if you don't feel like, I almost feel guilty for, not feeling, woo, hey, I should be great and I should have lost, weight by now, because that was one of the things and I should have, done this, and should, that word creeps in, which I hate because, well, I've banned it in my house because it doesn't ever make anybody feel good when you say the word. But that artificial deadline, that's very smart of you guys. And of course you guys did that. We, on the other hand, said, no, we've got to launch a new website. So people have been going, oh my God. But I think this idea of it's got to be perfect, and perfection is the opposite of self-acceptance. And that just means that we've all put this pressure to be a version of ourselves that is perhaps not as authentic. And that is exhausting, isn't it? It's exhausting.
You're exactly right. I think the big challenge for us at this time of year is how do we kind of unpack those expectations and actually
Yeah.
sit with ourselves and ask ourselves, what do I need at the moment? What do I need to not only get through this season, but to
Yeah.
actually, meet my own needs, to reconnect with myself, to
That's
recharge
right.
the batteries. And a big part of that, and I guess a big part of this conversation is actually putting some boundaries in place to honor yourself and
Well,
how you're
well,
feeling.
I love it because you and I have something very big in common in that we have, we're people pleasers, or we've struggled with that. Before we get onto that, because I can't wait to have that conversation and actually out it. It's almost like compulsive disclosure when I'm talking to you, Luke. I'm thinking that we should ask people in the chat, what are the things that stress them out the most? I'd love to hear from people who are there. It would be great for us to, yeah, let's take this opportunity for people to say what they feel is the most stressful, because that in itself is, I bet you it's all of the above. We put some thoughts down anyway, but going into that sort of, in the people pleasing sense, I always feel like I've got to be the best version of myself. I've got to somehow, be brighter, better, not swear as much, be nicer. Do you, I feel like in certain circumstances anyway, do you think this people pleasing thing, which is kind of linked to boundaries, is something that this time of year, it really is on steroids almost?
Yeah, I think it is because there's a lot more incoming requests. So I think when we think about people pleasing and as you said, over my life, I've been one of the great people pleasers, and it's something that I've really had to work on. And I think, people pleasers often have what we call porous boundaries, and it's this idea that, your needs and my needs are not that separate. And sometimes I will prioritize your needs over my own needs. So there's not a good
Yeah.
division.
Yeah.
And so around the festive season, when we're being asked to do a lot of things and there's a lot expected of us, people pleasers do find this a particularly tricky time of year. And we can be, I think the signs that you are being affected are really if you're feeling constantly overwhelmed, if you're
Yep.
feeling resentful, or
Yeah.
if you're feeling angry or frustrated, they can kind of be clues that there might be some boundary violations going on that you need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And so really to follow your own feelings around what's coming up for you at this time of year can be the first step to think about, okay, I might be leaning more towards the people pleasing end of the
Of
boundary
things.
spectrum. And we
Yeah.
know that the middle point of that spectrum, because at the far end we have rigid boundaries where there's too much of a separation between our own needs and others' needs. Whereas that sweet spot in the middle, healthy boundaries, are when we're able to have strong connections with other people, but not in a way that invalidates our own needs. It's
Because
that
that's
sweet
when
spot
it
where
comes
that
up.
balance is.
That's when that sort of feeling of I'm feeling not validated. I start to feel that sort of, "Ooh," and it's that, and I know that my emotions, I think of them not as good or bad now. I think of them as like my sat nav. And when they start to get, on the kind of red side, I think, okay, this is a sign for me that I need to pull back a bit and I need to think about, how do I put a boundary in place? Just for all of us on the call, I've opted out completely of Christmas this year. I'm sick of eating ham and jam and my mother criticizing my gratin potatoes. So what I've said is I am going to, for the first time, not host, and I'm going to sit quietly and have potato cakes, because you know what? I can. And the children are excited. They're not children anymore, they're 20 and 21, but they were relieved too. So I realized that they don't like the version of their mum on Christmas Day very much either. Um, they find her quite scary. And so I think it's an interesting thing, that, if you kind of are more relaxing yourself, you're going to enjoy it and people are going to enjoy you. And I'm looking at some of the comments. I mean, this expectation to travel, yes, I hear you. People that are not as organized, that is hilarious. My brothers rock up with no gifts, nothing, and say, sis, can I just write my name in your card to mum? And I'm like, no, no, you can't. See, there's a boundary right there.
Well done, very well done.
But that's kind of the other thing is, if you've got families, and it looks like some of us do, is just they don't always get on. And we always expect, it's family, but families, in the main, many families actually don't get on. And on this day, we're all meant to do kumbaya. And that's really, really hard.
And absolutely. And I think the idea that when there's conflict, and particularly for people pleasers, where that can bring up a lot of anxiety and strong feelings. And the idea that we might need to set a boundary can be really confronting for some people, let alone like the idea that I need to do it is challenging. Actually
Yeah.
doing it is another step up. And so
Yeah.
I think there are some, some little ways over the festive season where, as you did, just that very quick no can be quite effective. But
Oh,
also, I think for some people who it's really hard to do that, sometimes it can be easier to just talk about what you want the solution to be. And so
yeah.
if it's like, I'll come for Christmas lunch, but I'm going to leave at 4, that can be
And
you
just,
preempting a boundary. Or,
well, and everyone's got that uncle who's a bit loose, who sort of arrives, with one bottle of something average and then drinks five. And, you just sit there watching them just literally clean you out. And you just want to say, you know what? In those situations, how how would you how do you let go of stuff like that where you're looking at it and go, well, that's just I'm not being very Christmassy by counting the number of, but actually there is a lot of that. There's a lot of people that say, oh no, I'll help, and then they actually don't.
mm,
I'll help clean up. Oh, where are they? Oh, they've gone. So there's there's all that sort of stuff
yeah.
that is the hangover of it as well. What can you do in the moment, do you think, Luke, to just kind of circuit break some of those feelings?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think, firstly, I think to kind of do the internal work, there's a really nice technique called dropping anchor, which is when we are feeling full of that, resentment or anger or frustration. Dropping the anchor is really just taking a moment to acknowledge that's what's going on. Like, I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling this in my body. Here's
Yep,
how it's turning up for me. Just getting that little pause moment between the trigger and your reaction.
yep,
The
yep.
second step is really around how do I come back and reconnect with my body? So, how do I put my feet on the ground, feel the chair, just to ground myself back in my
I
body?
love that.
And then the third step is how do I engage in the present moment? How do I put my attention in this situation where it's going to be most effective and helpful for me? And that's
Yep,
just a little thing we can cycle through if we're feeling a lot of emotions, just to buy us a bit of time to figure out what's an effective response here. Because I think,
yeah, yeah.
sometimes, on Christmas Day, you might want to pick your battles. You might want to just go through that process, and it's okay to just let it slide. You don't have to fight every fight you're invited to attend.
No,
It can also be something to speak about. Um, people can't read our minds. We kind of you need to give people the benefit of the doubt and to communicate clearly around what would be helpful in this situation.
yeah.
I know that, as a bit of a self-disclosure, one of my terrible tendencies is when I go back home for Christmas, my lovely mother, who is a saint, she's fantastic. But sometimes I regress into the role of a 12-year-old where I will sit on the couch while my mum
Does
does
everything.
all the washing up, does all the cooking. And I actually have a moment where I'm like, Luke, you're 42, help out. You in your
Exactly.
own house, you help, you do a lot of the domestic work. Don't
But
just go back into the 12-year-old role when you go visit your mum.
that's so true.
And part
Uh,
of that is sometimes mum will say, can I have a hand? Which is my mum communicating her boundary. And I'm like,
yeah.
of course,
Of
I'm so sorry.
course.
Of course I will. I'm really sorry. But if she had just sat on that and grew resentment, then that wouldn't have been as effective as saying, here's what I need from you at the moment, which she shouldn't have to do. But we
But I
regress into
actually think that's a really important thing, because I remember last year, everyone was sort of standing watching me, and I, was slamming pots and pans. Like, and this idea of, do you want any help? Well, it's not really help, is it? Because they're all grown ass people and you're not being helped. I mean, they're there. It should be an automatic response. So I think for all of us, I remember saying to people, enjoying the view, and thinking that was probably a bit hard. But I like the idea of actually getting back into the moment, getting back into your body, grounding yourself, feeling things, because there are a lot of beautiful things around us at Christmas. So maybe it's literally just saying, okay, don't focus on that, focus on that, and doesn't the table look nice, and blah blah blah. So I think there's some really good things, but asking for help. I don't know. Someone's just put in here, Elena, thank you for that question. I don't know why we don't ask for help.
Mm,
I just know that I find it really hard. And you know, you don't want to have a roster because everyone goes, well, that's a bit full on. Asking for help in a way that says, you know, it's about delegation as well, where some of us are really good at it at work. And then we go home. And like I said to people, I'm not just a doormat. I have become wall to wall carpet. I'm just sitting here and doing everything. Um, but oh, that's interesting too. I don't want to feel like I'm inconveniencing. How are we inconveniencing people? That's about putting yourself second, isn't
That's
it?
a,
That's
that's
putting
a,
yourself second. And that's what are we doing that for?
yeah. And I think it's really good to acknowledge that if we've had a lifetime of putting others' needs before our own, it's really hard to flick a switch on that and all of a sudden become, the most assertive person in a function. I think
Yeah.
we really need to be gentle with ourselves and kind of, it's a skill we're trying to learn and really
Okay.
starting with what feels doable, what feels manageable, what are the things that you can say as a starting point to get your needs met. And a lot of the textbooks in assertiveness training talk about this idea of I statements. So when you do X, I feel Y, as letting people know the impact of their behavior. But a
Yeah.
lot of people
Yeah.
find that a really difficult first step. That feels like it's quite a blunt way of communicating a need. So that idea of saying, what's that first step that feels doable for you, and that might be something as simple as just saying what you want the outcome to be. And we do it at work all the time. When someone asks us to do something when we're full, we can say, I'm at capacity. If I
Yeah.
need to pick up
On
something else,
and
I need to put
prioritize.
something else down. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly
You
right.
don't just say, yes, I'll take more and more and more and more. And I think, well, some of us do, and then we learn that we can't do that because that just it doesn't not everything can be urgent and important. But I think there's a lot of stuff that also, you know, particularly with parents and parents who are older. My dad passed just before Christmas last year, and you know, it was just heartbreakingly sad. So, you know, a lot of people are dealing with older parents, parents who are no longer with us, or family members, you know, who are no longer with us. And it's almost like my you're meant to sort of gloss over it, and it's like, oh, well, this is Christmas, so you're meant to sort of somehow be a different person and not be grieving or whatever it is. But again, that is exhausting. So I think for people out there who, you know, who are in a situation where they've got a grief scenario going on, or someone who's absent, what would you say to them about how to, you know, just reconcile that on the day? You don't want to be Debbie Downer, but we all know grief is messy, and that these particular anniversary days are you know, for some of us, the toughest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I've had similar experiences where that Christmas Day, the absence of that person around the table, that empty place, can really trigger your grief. And
Sure.
because their memory is so entwined with the traditions of the day, sometimes the traditions can lose their meaning, or they lose the kind of the value. So it can be such a difficult day. And I think that idea of checking in with yourself and around. So what does authentically turning up this Christmas look like? It
Yeah.
might mean I need to tap out of a few things. It might mean I'm going to communicate with the family around what's helpful and not helpful for me at the moment. And it's okay to take 10 minutes to yourself and just go and sit in a room and just check your breathing, just have some time to
Yeah.
yourself, really
Yeah.
giving yourself permission to engage at the level you feel you're able to, I think is so important. And also I think there's a bit of self-compassion around this as well. Like I know we speak a lot
Totally.
about, compassion being this idea that it's action taken to alleviate suffering, and that can be directed towards someone else, but also to ourselves.
Yeah.
And there's two types of self-compassion. There's the tender self-compassion, which is I need to be caring to myself, I need to nurture myself like I
Yeah.
would for someone else I care about. But the other type of self-compassion is called fierce self-compassion. And that's the self-compassion that I'm someone worth standing up for. My needs are valid,
Yeah.
and I can be my own advocate. And I think when we're going through something difficult, we need a balance of those two types
Those
of
two things. Yeah.
self-compassion.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can lead to uncomfortable conversations. But I guess, more broadly, this idea of if you're not happy with the current situation, sometimes it can be worth going through some discomfort to get to the outcome that might be better for you.
Yeah, I love that because everybody handles things differently, but you know, there is no one way to do this. And you know, I remember I also lost my husband to cancer 5 years ago, and he was only 46 at the time, and the first Christmas was just awful. And you know, I had a shrine that I sort of put up to him with his pictures and his favorite things because we were just so craving him. And it was such a visceral thing. And I remember mum saying, that's morbid. And I said, oh, that's so weird that you would say that or think that. For me, it's just, it's what we all needed. It's what we all wanted. It was like we put as much effort into it as we did on the, you know, the tree that we didn't have that year was just all of his favorite things. And I think, you know, there are cultures that handle this far better, but I think you're right. It is about really knowing what is how if you were your own best friend and your best friend was feeling, you know, that way, what would you do and do it to self, you know, really. Well, we do have another question. I think question number 2, Liv, what was it? We've probably talked way beyond the question, but it would be good to get a poll because I want everyone on this particular session. Well, we've kind of covered that, but a yes or no would be good because this is a time for everybody, and we appreciate it. This is a busy time. So if you've even turned up today, you know, we're very grateful. So yes, do you feel pressure to please people more at this time of year? Well, I think you know the answers for Luke and I, and but it'd be nice to get a read on the room, so to speak.
Like, and we can tell you a quick story while we're
Yeah.
filling out the poll. Like back in the day, I was so terrible at setting boundaries. I was such a people pleaser that I had a situation where someone from work kept on wanting me to go out for a beer with him after work.
Right.
We had young kids at the time, and after work was just that hour where you needed to be home. I
Oh,
needed to be
totally.
start feed. I had to be hands on deck. But I was so uncomfortable at kind of rejecting him. I kept on coming up with a different excuse every time of why I couldn't go out for a beer, to the point that I actually started coming up with plans for an excuse generator app just so I could have a new excuse every single time. Until one day I just went, just communicate. At this stage of my life, it's difficult to go
Yeah.
out for a beer after work. Happy to grab lunch with you one day during the day. That's all it took, but I avoided that for months. It was
Well,
absolutely
because if you
crazy.
go back to, I don't want to hurt anybody. Look, if you break it down, you know, it's a very loving thing. Oh, look at that. 87% said yes. Oh, you know what? The people who said no, the 13%, you are rock stars. We need to learn from you. Because obviously you've got a technique, but that is fantastic to see that. But I think we basically don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and that's, you know, that's something though that I read something recently, and it said clarity. I think it was Brene Brown in one of her books, but it said clarity is kind. And I've really taken that on board because you kind of know when someone's making excuses.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like, I know that you know that I know that you know, and it's awkward. You're better off to just say, look, at the moment, this is where my life's at. And that person would probably go, God, yeah, of course. There's no stress whatsoever. But it does take time for us to honor that situation. And I think what you said before about, you know, the fierce self-compassion is I am worthy enough to be able to say, this just isn't going to work for me right now.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple of things there, Amy. I think for most people, guilt-free boundary setting doesn't exist. It kind of comes with the territory for a lot of us. And it's really about how do we work through those feelings rather than not set a boundary because it's too uncomfortable. And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, I always come back to like, why are we needing to set this boundary? Like, I think boundaries for me are one of the most overlooked aspect of self-care and looking after our mental health. We spend so much time thinking about all the different skills and strategies in terms of mindfulness and gratitude and exercise and all these things we do.
Sure.
But one of the ways I think about it is it's like water coming into a bucket. All of those self-care strategies get the water out of the bucket, but what boundaries do is they reduce the amount of water going into the bucket.
Into the bucket,
And
into the
and
bucket.
why that's so important is that it really helps us preserve our energy for the things like who and what matters most to us in life. And then
Yeah.
without boundaries, we're at service of all these other things, and we can neglect the things that matter to us most. So when I'm struggling to set a boundary, I always bring myself back to why am I doing this? It's because I really care about these things in my life, and I
Yep.
want them to get the best of me. I don't want to come home and be
Correct.
absolutely exhausted, and
Yeah.
I've got dregs for the people I care about most. So that I find that quite motivating to get me over that discomfort of setting a boundary.
Well, because then it's really not it's enlightened self-interest. It's not selfish. And I think there's a really
Yes.
big difference between that. I think for me, with the holidays, particularly with teenagers, it's really hard because, well, they just look at their screens and don't do very much. Wet towels on the floor, the whole thing. But I'm very clear now. I say to them, look, I will have breakfast, right? There will be ham and rolls and stuff in the fridge. You can make your lunch. So breakfast is laid out, cereal boxes, that's it. Lunch, make it yourself. I'll do dinner. So I say I'll do one meal where, I will actually do it. The rest, I don't want to hear, Mom, what's for lunch? That just is not going to work for me. So I think there's some boundaries there. And the kids have actually been quite good about this, sort of like, oh, yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Yes.
Why
Clear as
are you saying
time.
it so? Why are you saying it so loudly, Mum? Well, because I was expecting some sort of comeback.
I think that also touches on another little element around, sometimes we can hold on to the
Yes.
resentment or the anger for so long that by
Yeah,
the time we do set the boundary, it can be a bit of a firestorm because we've kind of had a gutful.
that's
Um,
right.
and I think, again, it is challenging, but that idea of setting the boundary as early as possible and as clearly as possible is always ideal. And whether that's starting a new job, starting a new project,
Yeah,
heading into the Christmas, really getting on the front foot around, what your expectations are. Because if we let it brew in us,
yeah.
then we can act in ways that
We're
aren't really
human.
how we want to.
Well, and as I've said at work, hope is not a strategy. So, hope is not a strategy, everybody. I write down on a bit of paper, here, I've got 8 days. Here is what I want to get out of these 8 days. And here's how I want to feel during these 8 days. And then I look at what does that involve? Does that involve, is it cooking one meal a day or not cooking at all? Is it having downtime where I just say, don't bother me until this time in the morning, or an hour's walk a day, or what is it? Because otherwise I just feel like all I'm doing is literally packing and emptying a dishwasher. And so I think it's really good, though, before the event, as you do at work, to sit down and have a strategy for how to manage this, and calmly communicate it and say, this is, we're all on holiday together, right? It's not, I'm here to serve you and make sure your holidays are fabulous. I also am on holiday. So I think we've had a lot of lovely comments about grief in the chat. I do think for everybody, just to finish up on that, the writing of cards and the keeping the flame and those things, I think they are all wonderful things. I think they're really, really healthy. We could do a whole other subject on grief, and I think we should. But everybody who is in that boat, I think you do whatever makes you feel as close and connected to the person you've lost that works for you, and that is no one else's business. So,
I,
but
I
thanks
hope,
for sharing in the chat. That's really lovely stuff in there.
yeah,
Messages,
I
etc.
really agree, Amy. Like, I think grief is such a personal thing, even within a family. Different members of the family express and need different things around their grief. I remember when my dad passed away many years ago, we all went about it slightly differently, but the one thing we do now every Christmas is he loved Elvis and the Elvis Christmas album. The first
Oh
year we
yeah.
played it, it was just tears around the table. But
Yep.
now, 10 years on, it's become this real anchor of the day where we wake up,
How
we keep
wonderful.
his
And
memory
honor
alive by
him.
playing this album. And it's become one of our main core traditions. And
But isn't that wonderful?
yeah.
It's just wonderful. Well, the final bit, because I know some people can't stay till the end, so we'll just do a few more minutes. But um, it is the giving season. But what I'm taking out of this is we need to understand what it means to give to ourselves as well. And, maybe, I said to you before that, what do people really give themselves a rest? We need rest. Or are we just going to slam, we're going to continue to look at our phones and continue to kind of sort of work and take up that mental space that you could be taking up with something else that was, really going to energize and rest you. I'd love to ask people about this recharge time, because I've just spent so many so-called holidays slamming into that second week of January and feeling like I didn't have a holiday at all. So I want to know, people, really honestly, are you going to switch off or not? And then we can talk to Luke about the importance of switching off, genuinely switching off. Lower the bar. That's it. That is good. I love lowering that. I think that's great. Hence potato cakes for Christmas. They're from Aldi and they're really good. So how many people genuinely intend to switch off and mean it? Please answer yes or no. And then while we're doing that, this gifting ourselves, having strategies without judgment, I love the idea of me being my own Santa. Oh, that everybody on this call, if there's one thing to take out of it, it's be your own Santa and think about what you would like most. Look, 81% Luke is saying they're really going to try and switch off. That is really, really good. Why is it so important to switch off?
And that idea of, I think at a physiological level, our nervous systems need a break. They are just so bombarded with information and demands. We need to disconnect to give ourselves a chance to repair at that level. I think that to me, this idea of how do you give yourself permission to take the pressure down for a period of time, but really importantly, how do you communicate that to the people around you in a way that it is honored? Something that I really encourage people to do is, even with your friends or your family, what's important to you about this break? What do you need to get out of it? Just ensuring that everyone's needs are being met around the table. And that might mean just scheduling a little bit around, I'm actually doing nothing on these days or for these chunks of the day, just to kind of give you that downtime to recharge, reconnect with yourself, and just do some things that you find enjoyable, that give you that spark, or just to one of the things I find really interesting around this time of year is savoring as a positive psychology strategy.
Oh, love it. Love it.
That idea of noticing in the moment a really something that just sparks a bit of joy in you and just soaking it up. It could be the kids running down the hallway excited in the morning on Christmas Day. Could be chatting with your friends, and just that moment where everyone's laughing at a joke, just sitting back and saying, this is lovely. This is really nice. And just soaking that up, I think, is a great thing to do over this period.
I think I love that too, because it's almost like, whether it's lowering the or just slow-mo, just slow it down. We do a number of exercises at Be Well Co around, just remembering the gift of the year that was, and maybe even looking at some photos that, you literally go through your phone and you go, oh my God, that moment was great. And oh God, that was so beautiful, that meal that I had. And, finding those little kind of, it's like a little pockets of joy, and just using them to kind of connect, but allow yourself that time for reflection. I think we don't want to just lurch and lurch and lurch onto the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Need to just slow it down.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think like a little bit of this is also, to get a little Buddhist about it. Like, I think when over this season, when we get presented with these challenges, I've always loved that Buddhist idea of, what is this moment teaching me? What do I need to meet this moment with? Is it an invitation around patience, around compassion, around self-respect? Like, what is this moment teaching me? I find a useful thing to just navigate through some tricky territory.
Bad stuff. Yeah, well, not bad stuff, but good and challenging stuff. What is it teaching me? What can I learn from this? This has been such a great chat, Luke. Very grateful. And I think from the sound of things, people have got some really good stuff out of it. We hope. We will be back on doing Fruit for Thoughts end of Jan. I think we've got one, or maybe not, Feb. But Would love to have you back on to talk further about some other topics because we could literally talk all day. Well, I know I could. But happy Christmas, everybody, or enjoy your festive season, enjoy your break. Put yourself on the Father Christmas list first and be your own Santa. That was my parting gift. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, everybody. Happy Christmas.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, everyone.